Conspiracy theories are fun, even if they're not true. But what if I told you there are some conspiracy theories that have some legs to them and you've never even heard of them? By have legs to them, I mean there's a compelling argument even if you realize later they're just ridiculous. So let's have fun in the comments section. Let's start it off with our first one. Everybody knows who Justin Trudeau is. Justin Trudeau is the current Prime Minister of Canada and the son to a former Prime Minister. Fidel Castro was the leader of Cuba for a very long time, and by leader I mean crazy, homicidal, dictator psychopath. Justin Trudeau looks like this, and Fidel Castro looks like this. On a side note, Justin Trudeau's mother, Margaret Trudeau, who was married to Pierre Trudeau when he was in office in the 1970s, had lots and lots of very close male friends who also happened to be very, very famous. She was known to spend evenings on the dance floor in New York while Pierre was away doing business in Ottawa. She was also rumored to have spent considerable time behind closed doors with Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. We've all heard the story about her getting out of the limo with the Rolling Stones after hours in there. Another one of Margaret Trudeau's very close male friends was Fidel Castro, like you see here. Now, Pierre Trudeau was also friends with Fidel Castro, but it is rumored that Margaret Trudeau spent lots and lots and lots of time with Fidel while Pierre was doing business elsewhere during their trips to Cuba. So all of this culminates into the theory that Justin Trudeau is actually the love child of his mother and Fidel Castro. Now, is this ridiculous? Well, I can see why you'd think that. They do look basically identical, and Trudeau, through his remarks and actions through the last 9 years of his reign as Prime Minister, has said some very curious things about how he sort of, kind of, definitely supports communism, so it makes sense on paper. However, Margaret Trudeau never even met Fidel Castro, officially anyway, until 1976. Justin Trudeau was born in 1971. If you don't know how babies are made, that is not possible. Next up, the Mandela Effect. Now, obviously, you know what the Mandela Effect is. That's not what we're talking about it existing or not. There's a twist to it. If you're unfamiliar with what the Mandela Effect is, many people distinctly remember Nelson Mandela's dying in prison in the 1980s, even though he was released in 1990 and then passed away in 2013. The Mandela Effect refers to a phenomenon where large groups of people remember events, details, or facts differently from how they actually occurred. So the Mandela Effect one is the most common one, which is why it's named that, but some other notable examples to really drive this home. The Berenstain Bears, a popular children's book series, is remembered by many as the Berenstain Bears, but the correct spelling has always been like this. The famous line in Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, "Luke, I am your father," isn't actually the line. The line is, "No, I am your father."
No, I am your father.
Do you remember the Monopoly Man having a monocle? Well, guess what? He never did. This one, I think you're probably getting confused with the Pringles guy. And the one that really got me when I was researching this video and never thought of before is that famous song by Queen, "We Are the Champions." The phrase that ends it is usually quoted, "of the world," but the studio version ends without those words. But the one that we're going to talk about today is the Fruit of the Loom logo. Fruit of the Loom makes underwear and undershirts and a whole bunch of things, and you obviously recognize this logo. But many people think it's missing something. It's missing this weird looking thing called a cornucopia. And you had no idea what it was called if you don't know about this theory because you've never interacted with a cornucopia before. So the idea is many people remember the logo with the cornucopia, but Fruit of the Loom says that it never had it in the first place. There was even a study done and published in 2022. Researchers at the University of Chicago found that respondents' memories of logos for Volkswagen and Apple, or such characters as Pikachu and C-3PO, were often false. Most people remember the black bit on the end of Pikachu's tail. That was never actually a thing. The study found people tend to be confident about misremembering logos, but researchers didn't conclude exactly why. Their testing of the Fruit of the Loom logo, however, even seemed to rule out the schema theory, which states that people will fill in missing information based on their associations. When respondents were asked to choose among the brand's real logo, one with a cornucopia or another with a plate, most people picked the cornucopia versus the plate, even though a plate coincides with fruit much more than a cornucopia, and most people have never interacted with a cornucopia in the first place. The point of all of this? In 2023, this image started to circulate, and the whole thing was, well, we were right all along. There was a cornucopia, even though Fruit of the Loom themselves said last year in 2023, the Mandela Effect is real, but the cornucopia never was. So all of this culminates in the fact that there's a theory now, or a conspiracy theory, let's say, where the government or some agency is altering what we think of as the past to look like something that never happened. And the idea is, how easily can they make people en masse misremember things or erase events that actually happened by saying, no, it was always like this, it was never like that. So kind of a mind control thought experiment. It's an interesting one. It's a new one. What do you think? One I bet you've never heard of is the phantom time hypothesis. This is an interesting one I've heard a little bit about, and in doing research for this video, it kind of blew me away. This is a historical conspiracy theory proposed by a German historian in 1991. The theory is that a significant portion of the early Middle Ages, specifically the years 614 to 911 AD, was fabricated and never actually happened. The theory is that those 297 years were added to the calendar. It wasn't like it was just erased from history. It's just that we just jumped from one period to the next period. This would mean that we're living in the 18th century instead of the 21st. So why would this happen? What is the motivation for this? Well, this actually makes a lot of sense. Not saying the theory is true, but think about this. The Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly another conspired to alter the calendar because Otto III wanted to reign during the year 1000 AD for the prestige of it. So they manipulated historical records to make it seem like it was the year 1000. It can also be argued that there's a scarcity of archaeological evidence from the time period between 614 and 911 AD. There's a lot of texts and writings that would actually indicate that this could have happened in the first place, and a lot of artifacts have been misdated, and then later scientists or archaeologists have said, no, actually this was from before or after that period. However, there is substantial archaeological and written evidence from the period in question, including artifacts, buildings, and manuscripts. This is a fringe theory, a little silly, not as crazy as the Earth is flat, but it's a pretty fun one. Have you ever heard about this one before? I want to briefly touch on the Frozen conspiracy because I actually was wrong in a video a couple weeks ago. The Frozen conspiracy is that because Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen after his death, they didn't want it every time that you Googled Frozen and Disney in the same sentence, you'd see this conspiracy theory. Because as it turns out, Walt Disney, according to the family, was cremated and his ashes were spread. So it's a conspiracy in and of itself that he was cryogenically frozen to begin with. So to dispel this and to have this out of the public image, now when you Google Frozen Disney, you get a film called Frozen. And the conspiracy theory is they only made the film in the first place in order to hide this. Okay, it also made millions and millions of dollars. So it makes sense, but also if it's true, they got really rich trying to hide something. But also this is a testament to how conspiracy theories work, because I've heard since I was a little child that Disney was frozen cryogenically, or at least his head was. Like, everybody knows this, to the point where I didn't even Google it because I was as sure as the sun will come up tomorrow that was the case. So anyway, a few of you commented on it. I was wrong. Sorry about that. There you go, power conspiracy theory. But here's a fun one that started to really swirl around the internet in the early days. This was in the early days of conspiracy theories, or modern day ones, when loose change and zeitgeist started to come out in the early 2000s. The whole idea that the Titanic never sunk was a really interesting one. What you need to know is the Titanic had a sister ship, the Olympic. The Olympic was very, very damaged, and of course those two ships were owned by the very same company. The person in control of that company was JP Morgan. If you don't know who JP Morgan is, well, he was a big fan of the Federal Reserve coming into place and the universal banking system. He owns, well, JP Morgan Chase, I think it's called now. I'm not American, I know you guys have stuff named after JP Morgan. He was a big banker guy in the early 1900s. Very rich, very wealthy, and very powerful. So the theory is that the Titanic and the Olympic were swapped, and that it was the Olympic that actually sank. And this is because the Olympic had been involved in several accidents and was more damaged and less valuable. So according to the theory, the White Star Line, which is who owned both ships, switched the ships to collect insurance money as the Titanic was insured for a larger amount. And it is true that the White Star Line would probably have issues unless JP Morgan and other investors were to sink their own money into it to repair to the point where you could actually set sail with this thing again, the Olympic. And some people would point out that the pictures of the Titanic the day that it sailed did look different from what it was supposed to look like and looked more like the Olympic. There's also been the suggestion that the behavior of certain crew members and an unusual handling of eviction process hint at a planned insurance fraud. Also, it is true there were way too few lifeboats on the Titanic. Way too few. It's almost as if they knew there was going to be a rescue effort in the first place. However, there is lack of substantial evidence. First of all, the ships weren't really that similar that in a week's time you could just swap places and lay out and make it indistinguishable from each other. Plus, it's reported that the insurance payout really wouldn't be that lucrative that you'd want to sink a ship in the first place. So let's double down and talk about a different theory about the Titanic. What if the people that were a proponent of opposing the new universal banking system that was proposed then, the Federal Reserve, were all on the ship and they all went down and died? Some of the wealthiest men in the world were aboard the Titanic on her maiden voyage. Several of whom, including John Jacob Astor IV, Isidor Straus, and others, were allegedly opposed to the creation of the US Central Bank. This makes sense. We now know that there have been vessels and planes that have disappeared who have had very influential people who might have changed the outcome of things on board. Not saying this is one of them, but it is a tactic that's been used before around the world. So, was it the Titanic that sunk or the Olympic? It was probably the Titanic. Spoiler alert. I mean, this theory was really fun, and then we found the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, so we can kind of clarify that's what it was. The best for last, one of my favorite ones, Amelia Earhart was a hero by modern standards and standards back then in the 1940s. She was trying to circumnavigate the globe as the first female pilot to do that. And to this day, there's never been a confirmed we know what happened to Amelia Earhart and her navigator who was with her in that plane. However, of all the conspiracy theories in the world, I believe this one for sure. The theory is that she crashed and was eaten by coconut crabs. Okay, hold on. I know that sounds crazy. Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan crash landed on Nkumaroru, which is a remote island in the Pacific Ocean. And when I say remote, look at it on a map. There's nothing even close. But here's the thing. This theory is supported by radio distress signals and anecdotal evidence. And it is true, on that island there are giant coconut crabs. These are the largest terrestrial arthropod in the world, up to 3 feet long, and their behavior does coincide with what could have happened according to the theory. They have big giant claws, pincher-like things, I would say, that they can crush coconuts with. Just imagine how strong they are. And they eat carrion. So if you had people living on the island and then they passed away, of course their bodies would be dismembered after they were eaten, and perhaps the bones would be fragmented all over the place because they would be carrying parts of the body all over the island to get away from each other. So you'd have to find bones there for this theory to make sense, right? You're right, and they did. In 1940, a British colonel officer, Gerald Gallagher, discovered human remains on the island, along with a campfire, a sextant box, and other artifacts. The bones were initially thought to belong to a male, but later forensic analysis suggested that they could have belonged to a woman of European descent. This is consistent with Earhart's profile. However, the bones were eventually lost. How do you lose perhaps the most important bones that have ever been found? And by the way, these bones were said to have matched Amelia Earhart 99% closer to any living human on Earth. This theory isn't a crackpot theory at all. You can take your tinfoil hats off. This one I think is definitely probably true. In that, why else would there be human bones there, a campfire there, around that same time? Let me know in the comment section below what you think. As always, please hit the like and subscribe. We're really trying to grow this channel. Check out last week's video about assassinations on presidents. That video, probably the best one so far. And we do videos on every weekend, so I'll see you in the next one.